What's up, everyone? This is the EWT draft analysis. I'm not going to do the thing where I go through each mon one by one, etc., and I did this, and then I did this, and this mon's good, because I feel like most people, generally speaking, should already know, what a Zero Aura does, or what a Curum does, or stuff like that. I will sort of go down the line of thinking for how I drafted, but generally speaking, I think draft analyses make the most sense when you have the entire team in the picture. Most people are here just to see what the draft is anyway. So boom, here you go. There's the draft. And you get to stare at a Dunsparce underneath my head this entire time. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, not going to be a traditional draft analysis, mostly because I saw Dr. Slacking do this for the UBL. It just made so much more sense to just be like, this mon fits on this team in this draft, in this role, and this role, and this role. You all know what each individual mon does, generally speaking. If not, go to Bulbapedia or something. So, this is the EWT draft. My goal generally surrounding it was that I wanted to draft some nice top-tier speed, build around it in an offensive way in which I can find pivoters, get a few special breakers that pair well with Zero Aura, given that was the mon that fell to me round 1 and I wanted to build around. And then I decided that I wanted to just rally support behind basically a physical breaker, a special breaker, and then slow pivots like Corviknight, which you see on your screen here. So that was the idea behind the draft. It didn't go exactly how I wanted it to. There was a few things that I'll get to that I think could have been made better had I made a few decisions differently, but still good nonetheless. I'm going to talk about the top three first, which are the three that you see over there, being Zero Aura, Corviknight, Curum. I spent a lot of points on this trio of three, primarily because I think that they form a very solid offensive combination with each other. Curum being capable of being a very strong, solid special breaker, capable of freeze drying, ice beaming, Draco Meteoring, really any kind of that threaten out any sort of grasses or threaten ground types that Zero Aura might struggle with, which is something that Curum does a very solid job breaking. I like, in relation to ground types, having Corviknight, because Corviknight comes in on those ground types that Zero is threatened out by, and then in turn can get a slow pivot off into Curum if it wants to, or alternatively it can just kind of sit there and be super fat. Curum as well, I think, works well with these other top two because, generally speaking, Bolt Beam is a very good, strong combination that has range over the majority of the metagame, so just that offense alone, I think, is threatening enough in prep to justify it. The Grimmsnarl was added as an added means of support. I wanted to be able to have some speed control like Thunder Wave, as well as some damage control like in Reflect and Light Screen, that could help any of these top three mons run setup sets if the matchup calls for them. So, for example, I would want Zero Aura to run Bulk Up, but Zero Aura isn't exactly the bulkiest thing there is. Obviously, with its speed stat, I can invest more EVs into it, but it isn't necessarily the easiest thing to bulk up in itself. So, having screen support to be able to allow Zero Aura to do that, or Curum set up a DD, or Corviknight set up some kind of bulk up, power trip shenanigans, whatever I want to do, screens allow that to happen. I also liked Grimmsnarl here is a physical breaker in itself. You can see later down the line I have a few more physical breakers like Blaziken and potentially even Pinsir in some given matchups, but generally speaking, I thought that Grimmsnarl was a nice physical breaker that took pressure off Zero Aura being a physical breaker and allowed it to, with its high speed tier, be a cleaner in given matchups, or at least it opened up the option for Zero Aura to be a cleaner if I had sort of a secondary physical breaker. Grimmsnarl's physical move pool is pretty massive, so I was pretty excited to try it out here for sure. Then Slowking rather, my bad, was the fifth thing I ended up deciding to draft. I was debating between a lot of psychic types. I ultimately decided to go for I'm going to say that a lot, Slowking, because of the slow pivot, which is really nice with teleport, but I also liked it because it gave me a mon that basically resisted things that my fat mons like Grimmsnarl and Corviknight didn't already resist. So I'm talking the fire types, which I don't really have a great switch into primarily, as well as ice types, since my steel and my ice in itself also doesn't resist ice. So having sort of a fat special wall is really nice. It frees Corviknight up to run more physically defensive EVs, so I can just sort of have Slowking, my specially defensive mon, on the side. I also like Slowking as well, in the sense that it can be an offensive mon if I want it to, unlike, I think Slowbro struggles doing that a little bit more. So it can run Trick Room Nasty Plot if I feel like the matchup calls for it. And the other thing I want to touch on here is picking up Tentacruel a few picks down the line. A lot of me picking Tentacruel down the line was just because I was kind of struggling to get a grounded poison. At that point in the draft, I was really struggling to find any type of grounded poison that wasn't just horseshit that I would never bring to a game in the first place. And I was also struggling to find some kind of spin option because my clearing, I think, was Blaziken Corviknight, which I didn't want Corviknight to be pressured too much. And I also wanted more hazards because, as you can see, my hazards are kind of lackluster. They're all these bottom 4 that you see. So I figured T-Spikes was also a nice addition to the team as well, which could actually help sort of if I decide to make a bulkier team, it could help sort of the defensive combination of my pressure mons like Corviknight and Kyurem, and then maybe Slowking if it wants to be fat, for example. So having T-Spikes helps with that just as well. But yeah, I wanted to also pick up Tentacruel later on in the draft because it frees up Slowking to be offensive if it wants to, and vice versa, right? So in a given matchup, I can choose to make Slowking offensive if I've chosen to make Tentacruel defensive, and vice versa. If I've chosen to make Slowking defensive, it frees up Tentacruel to be a more offensive mon. Both of these water types are mons with good offensive utility, but when it's the only bulky water on the team, the roles are often constrained. So I wanted to be able to draft 2 so that the roles are loosened up a bit and they're different enough, in my opinion, to be able to be justified on the same draft for sure. So I'm excited to make that work. As you can see, I also doubled up on fighting types, which you could see right up there. Boom. I'm getting the hang of this mirror OBS thing. But anyway, we have Blaziken and we have Virizion. Now, I talked about this a little bit in the draft stream that I was hosting. I was hosting with Automatic if you want to check it out. It's on the EWT YouTube channel. But I ultimately decided that I wanted both fighting types because I felt that I needed a strong physical breaker, which Blaziken offered me, and it was cheap enough to give me that choice. It gave me an actual like offensive pivot as well that I could play around with Zeraora with, because right now like the other pivoters I have are slow pivoters, more sort of defensive support options. So I wanted the other fast pivot option to play around with Zeraora, and at the same time, I felt that I wanted a grass type and I needed something that filled the speed tier, so Virizion helped with that. I didn't mind the double fighting here because, one, double fighting, generally speaking, isn't that bad. Dr. Slacking has managed to convince me that one of two things happens. Either they share the exact same answer, right? And bringing both against your opponent will eventually pressure them to, will eventually pressure that one counter with, having 2 just magnifies the amount you pressure maybe a bulky psychic type or something. But generally speaking, Virizion and Blaziken are different enough to probably warrant different counters given how vastly different their secondary typings are, how different their moves that they use are. I mean, I guess they both run Swords Dance sometimes, but Virizion can it can heal, it can set up screens, it can run special, Calm Mind, whereas Blaziken can kind of just like spam the Specs move, whereas one can U-turn, one can, take knockoffs better. Like, there's different utilities that fighting types offer that one fighting type doesn't necessarily always fill the role of, so having 2 will certainly help. Rhydon is just kind of there as the dedicated rocker on the team, primarily because I needed a ground type that got rocks. I am typically someone who I really want a high tier ground because all the low tier grounds really don't impress me. Rhydon's one of those. I'm not really impressed by Rhydon. I think it could and should be a lot better, but a lot of the ground types that I wanted, like Mudsdale, Sandaconda, Palossand even, were taken before I ended up getting to this pick, sadly. So that's kind of my biggest regret, not taking my ground type a little bit earlier, so I could have had something a little bit stronger. But Rhydon doesn't hurt nonetheless. I might have to bring it to a little bit more games than I'm comfortable bringing it to, but it's not by any means the worst. As long as it can reliably get rocks up, its job there is kind of done. I don't really need it as the ground electric immunity because I have a Zeraora. So generally speaking, I was okay with getting a low tier ground in this instance, primarily just because I have that Volt Absorb Mon up top. I already talked about Tentacruel. Pinsir and Dunsparce kind of rounded the team out. Pincer, I wanted to add primarily just as a secondary ground resist option. I was just kind of scared of ground types for this team, generally speaking, probably for no reason whatsoever. It also give me another rocker. And I also just think it's a good, solid sort of physical breaker that's a little faster. I wanted the option of just having another mon that could be a physical breaker. Spam knockoff, have mold breaker to beat things like the Rotom Heats, for example, that kind of beat my team pretty well right now. Was thinking about some niche options that Pincer kind of deals with that would help some of the specific counters that I saw on my opponent's drafts. Anyway, Dunsparce is the last mon. Generally speaking, I think Dunsparce is kind of just like whatever. I can like pretend to be all slick about it and be like, ooh, it's the new Palpitoad. It's so great. But it's probably not. I'll probably bring it to 1 or 2 games. The reason I just decided I wanted it is like a third rocker couldn't hurt, given how low tier my other rockers are. I don't have a normal type yet. And Glare Spam is pretty solid for stuff like an offensive Kyurem and an offensive Grimmsnarl, Blaziken, etc. So I felt it was the best 1-pointer on the board that offered all I needed. So it works. But that's the team. Figured a quicker run through of it would be far better than just like a 30-minute like explanation of what each mon does. Definitely be sure to check out all the EWT coaches linked in the description below. And we are playing Slightly Salty week 1, the person who we lost to in week 1 of the UPBA. So we're looking to get some redemption there. Fingers crossed that it ends up working out. I really hope so. So I will see you all in that game. So thank you for watching.